give children and teachers iPads, etc., they are not going to succeed. And I'll be blunt here. Those who are using these technologies to reimagine the old ways of tackling exclusion, they are the ones who are going to get there faster.
Can we give an example?
Let me give you a couple of examples. In India, for example, the India Stack, so using the trinity of digital identity, so 1.2 billion digital identities in a safe and a framework that is derived after a degree of consultation, checks and balances, plus financial inclusion. So 300 million new financial accounts being opened. That's an old tool. But you see what becomes of that old tool when you combine it with these new. You spoke of the combinatorial effects of this new age of industrialization. I wouldn't call it the fourth industrial revolution, that's another debate. But so the combinatorial effect, financial inclusion, and on top of that, mobile telephone. Where excess costs, affordable access has a different meaning. What Reliance Jio has done with 4G connectivity, and that's brought down costs tremendously. What this does is creates the common rails for innovation and participation in the digital economy by a lot more people than before. That's inclusiveness. So whether you're a small company, and you have similar examples from China. The power of the e-commerce platforms to get 10 million plus small businesses, many of them run by women and people living in rural areas, people with disabilities. That is because of the combinatorial effects of, again, mobile telephony, secure payment systems, smart logistics, and these e-commerce platforms working together. And the Chinese government has managed to accordion policy making. Where there are risks, you tighten the accordion. Where there is less risk, you expand it. Something which is being done in India, or something which... There are new ways to do this. In South Africa, for example, community networks. So where a village worker actually collects the money for slips that give you Wi-Fi access, and then the entire village discusses what to do with that money. So you're rethinking your old development financing challenge using access. So this is an opportunity agency. This is where education comes in. Education not just in the sense of teaching coding or STEM subjects, but also bringing robotics to a poetry class, having a more cross-cutting approach, which would lower the barriers for girls, because girls are brainwashed into thinking that this requires a lot of mathematics, and 7-10 years would have this diversity of skills that would allow them to benefit from the convergence of these different technologies.
Great. Koketso, to take this, to continue in this vein of conversation, you mentioned that that you would like to talk a little bit about collaboration. So just focusing on that, are there certain strategies that you have come across or that you advance? And to add to that, this issue, we had a discussion yesterday about scalability. One of the speakers said something about how in trying to implement,
So there have been a number of responses to this idea of the fourth industrial revolution, whether you believe it's real or not. There have been a number of responses globally to this phenomenon. Let me focus a little bit on what we've seen the developed world do. So countries like Germany have Industry 4.0, so we're in production 2030. The common thread in these programs is the multi-stakeholder approach to tackling this phenomenon. And what I mean by that is that there is academia that is involved on these platforms, there's private sector involvement, and there's public sector involvement. So what we're seeing is that these countries are looking at it almost at a life cycle, from a life cycle perspective. They're taking a step back and saying, okay, from an academic sense, what are the main technologies, the main products, the main services, the main ideas and innovations that are coming out? How do we feed that then into the private sector for appropriate funding? And what sort of regulations or changes do we need to make on a policy level in order to assist the development of these innovations into the real world? So in terms of strategies, I think one of the major things that we're seeing out of the countries who are already responding to the fourth industrial revolution is a collaboration. The second part of that, I think that Africa can definitely benefit from, piggybacking off the Africa Trade Agreement and Africa Free Trade Area now, is around regional collaboration. You know, one of the reasons Brexit is such a big issue right now is because it's cutting off those ties and those advantages of being in that economic bloc. So you are now taking away the advantages of that free trade, the access to markets, and you're taking, you know, the UK a step backward in that sense. Now, what Africa can do in terms of practical steps today is to take advantage of these free trade agreements that have been put in place, some of the regional blocs that already exist, your SADC, your ECOWAS regions, which are already successful in some areas, and try to piggyback off that in order to create hubs and places of tech innovation. We've already seen in Kigali, for example, they've got a special economic zone which has done great things for economic development. But how do we take that a step further into a regional conversation and making that, you know, scale and make the pace go faster for integrating fourth industrial revolution to the future?
If I had, and the areas that you are engaged in, obviously these are key sectors for any economy and for any country, especially developing economies where basic services, there's still a developmental gap there that needs to be bridged when it comes to access to these services. Is this something that you find yourself thinking about, how you can replicate the work that you do in Ghana, across borders in the region? Is there a regional?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, part of what we've been doing over the years is, you know, trying to you know, engage a lot of people. So,
and if I could just add, because this is obviously people learning or to fulfill the potential of an economy, what are the sort of reactions that you get?
All right, so just to add a little bit on the collaboration. So, I mean, to achieve this, I mean, collaboration is so important. And for what we are doing, we just don't want to, you know, limit our work or operations only in Ghana. So, at the moment, one of the key things we're also doing is exploring how some of these technologies that we are developing can be implemented in. So what we're trying to do is we're also trying to bring, I mean, all of Africa, you know, to a common ground where we are able to, like, you know, build the potential of people. So this year, for instance, we've been able to engage about 25 countries in Africa who are, you know, engaged in some sort of robotics activity. So eventually, we want this knowledge to actually spread across, you know, the entire continent, because one of the things we need to think about when it comes to, you know, access is that, you know, Africa might be able to, you know, develop solutions, okay, that is unique to us, and because we are in this domain, you know, we understand some of the things better. So instead of just, you know, importing solutions and bringing them and trying to make them work, what we have to do is actually you know, equip, especially the young people, and that is why we're doing a lot of work in the area of education, equipping them to have the skills and the capabilities. Okay, so we are focusing so much on problem solving.
So we've talked a little, mostly about socioeconomic factors here, as they relate to access and what that access then consequently means for development and economies as a whole. The question here I would like to pose to the Minister is the one that has to relate more to political element in this question of access. So governments are often pitted against technology, against digital technologies. And we've seen in several parts of the world, including in India, where freedom of press and expression often gets a beating. India in 2007 for access to these and the absorption of these technologies in societies.
Muchas gracias. Thanks a lot. No creo que es principalmente por el gobierno, sino por las generaciones que forman los gobiernos.
I don't believe it's pretty much the case of our government, but the different generation that are in Equatorial Guinea right now.
Tecnología en este país.
We have the practical example of Rwanda, in which the president is the first one who pushed the technological advancement in Rwanda.
Pero en el caso concreto de Guinea Ecuatorial,
However, in the particular case of Equatorial Guinea,
efectivamente, yo personalmente he encontrado dificultades a la hora de implementar el proyecto. Pero creo que cuando la política decide, todo es posible.
however, when the politics decide, like make good decision, I believe everything is possible.
Pero si me permite, antes de seguir, quiero recoger un aspecto muy importante en la agenda digital que estamos trabajando en Guinea Ecuatorial.
If you give me the opportunity before I move forward, I would like to highlight a very a very important aspect into the digital agenda in Equatorial Guinea.
Y se trata de el segundo eje estratégico, cuál es la alfabetización numérica de la población.
What I want to highlight concerning to the digital agenda is the alphabetization of the numeric of the economic numeric in Equatorial Guinea. Sorry.
En el sentido de que justo que también los colegas han hablado de la formación y esto tiene mucho que ver con la reticencia que muchos tienen con las tecnologías.
That point is very important because I would like to go back to what some of my colleagues had said, because that particular aspect has a disadvantage into the old generation.
Porque nos hemos dado cuenta, en el caso concreto de Guinea Ecuatorial, creo que es así en muchos países, que el desconocimiento crea más miedos que lo que se debería.
Because we have found
le rendimos más responsables en el uso de las mismas.
we believe that educating people from the technological aspect make them become more responsible when it comes to the use of technology.
Y se da el caso que tenemos la población más joven del mundo y su lenguaje es exactamente los bits. O sea, deberíamos hacerles conocer realmente y abrazar este lenguaje si África queremos llevarlo a las alturas que merece.
Technological world or industry.
Y no quisiera concluir sin hacer referencia a otro eje de actuación que, en mi opinión, puede ser clave para reducir las barreras de los ciudadanos a los bits.
I would like to finish this intervention without highlight a particular aspect that can be essential into the use of technology.
Me refiero principalmente a la necesidad de favorecer y hacer lo que es posible para desarrollar el tejido industrial nacional.
National industrial from a technological aspect.
Para ello,
for that reason,
básica y superior en los jóvenes.
For that reason, is essential to focus and educate the people from a professional aspect in, I would say, three different dimensions: young people, old people, and perhaps the third generation.
Esto nos ayudaría a África a tener una generación de emprendedores jóvenes en las tecnologías de la información y la comunicación.
That would help Africa to have young entrepreneurs into the TIC sector, into the access and facility of technology.
Y por último, a lo que ha referido mi colega aquí sobre las leyes, que son muy importantes, elaborar leyes y tomar decisiones que favorezcan el crecimiento.
To sum up, I would like to highlight what my colleague have said, that government have to create rules and regulation to facilitate the easy access of technology for our next generation.
Porque hay un aspecto que hace poco lo en los países africanos.
Because there is an access that I would like to highlight here, or there is an idea that I disagree with that he mentioned in the third National Economy Conference that was held in Equatorial Guinea a few months ago, and he would like to mention that in here as well.
Porque pienso, por ejemplo, para nosotros Guinea Ecuatorial, ponemos de la yuca. O sea, de que la importación de la banana y de la yuca sea más cara que la importación de la tecnología. Esto se puede comprender.
Because he can understand that to import banana to Equatorial Guinea, it can be a lot cheaper than technology. He can understand that.
Porque al menos producimos banana, pero lo que es contradictorio es que queremos desarrollar la red de lo que ha costado el mismo equipo.
What he do not truly understand is that when we import, let's say, equipment related to the TX and stuff, they cost us a lot more because we should have in consideration that Equatorial Guinea do not have a strong industry to build and to create such as equipment.
Creo que esto es una otra barrera de los ciudadanos.
Please raise your hand, and I think there'll be a microphone that we provided. This one.
Consultancy. I have a question for Koketso. I thought your comments about the problem shifting from access to devices to access to the next generation digital economy is very interesting. And I'd be curious for your thoughts on where you think the biggest bottleneck or the most difficult challenge to overcome for countries getting access to that new economy is.
Here we have a second.
Over the last couple of days, I've been really interested that one of the things that has come up in terms of digital access is that the new skills that are getting really important are the soft skills, sort of how we navigate this digital environment. And also, no one's really talking about it, but in this digital world, we also need to eat. And I think what's really interesting is, we're talking about access to robotics and access to AI and STEM, but fundamentally these are the jobs that are all going to disappear in the next 20 years. So in the interest of leapfrog, I'd like to hear the panel's opinion on in really future-proofing this continent and getting us there, or not even just Africa, but other developing countries that are struggling with basic digital access, which I'm not at all denying is an incredible problem. But how do we actually leapfrog in this world that's changing faster than we can keep up with?
I'll take a third question. Intervention.
Cannot power our economies. So how do we begin to talk about taking part in the new digital economy when we cannot even power the economy that exists today? That's just from an electricity perspective. When we talk about regional collaboration and regional trade, we need to talk about rails, roads, ports, the infrastructure that actually facilitates this trade. And I think the very first thing that we would need to deal with as a continent is infrastructure. How do we get that done? Then we talk about governance. Africa has gone through this wonderful democratization process, and this year has been one of the biggest in terms of the number of elections on the continent. Just this year, I think it's over a dozen elections on the continent. The trouble is that we are still seeing cases of corruption, of maladministration, and all sorts of issues. So, and I think the biggest fixer to this issue for me is the youth population on this continent. So it is people like the ones who are sitting in this room who need to get involved, not just from a political sense, but how many of us here are sitting here belonging to accounting organizations or engineering bodies. Those are the kind of bodies that governments and other people in the tech space will consult when they're talking about these technology spaces. So for me, infrastructure and governance are the two big things that are a bottleneck in Africa. In terms of how do we make sure we eat, for me, this is exactly the point of that the economy is changing. In the past, Africa has been left behind in terms of how do we eat because we haven't participated in the second industrial revolution. Make sure that we're able to quickly catch up now, but also that our strategies are forward-looking enough that we're not always catching up in the future.
Thank you.
For even in countries where there are well-established schemes of crop insurance, it takes months for the farmers to get the compensation. Using these technologies, drones, AI, and you can do this literally in days. We have to reimagine the next generation of infrastructure, and that will have the networks, the access, the fiber optics, but it will also have a layer of data infrastructure, which is what these common rails that I spoke about. This goes to the first question about the digitalizing economy. How do you make sure that you have access to opportunities in the digitalizing economy? You do that through common rails and guardrails so that people don't fall off and abuse is not there, new monopolies are not created. So my final thoughts, I just want to point to 5 recommendations from the panel's report related to this area, leaving aside the others.
And very, very brief.
Very brief. So maybe 3 I mentioned already, but I would add metrics. If we don't measure something, we don't see it. So we are advocating a new way of measuring inclusiveness. There is work that's going on in OECD, ITU, other places, but it's still from a different era. So new way of, and then human and institutional capacity. And here I would add lifelong learning. So this is, the minister referred to it and others have as well. So in addition to these common rails, guardrails, the digital public goods types of platforms, we need these other softer infrastructure aspects if we are really to leave no one behind.
Minister, last thoughts?
Lady Hacks is pretty, I would say, young for Africa. In Equatorial Guinea,
y sobre todo en la República de Guinea Ecuatorial, porque necesitamos las tecnologías para desarrollarnos. Necesitamos Internet para informarse y para formarse. No creo que, y me recuerdo que hace unos años unos expertos demostraban que cada un puesto de trabajo que se perdía por la introducción de las tecnologías, se creían 2 o 3 puestos más.
Because he believed that Equatorial Guinea is very young on that aspect, and Equatorial Guinea still need technology to connect to people, to inform the citizen, and to connect the nation to the world. However, he would like to highlight one particular a statement that the gentleman made 3 years ago, that for every 5 jobs that people lose into the technological aspect, 1 job is generated into the domestic aspect. I don't know if it makes sense.
One more time?
Okay, what he was trying to highlight is that a gentleman said a few years ago, that for 5 different jobs that he was saying that for every 5 different jobs that the technological aspect take away, 2 or 3 jobs were created in consequence.
Great.
Yep, that's what the experts say.
3 jobs that are taken away, 1 job will be created. But for women, with automation and digitization, it's every 5 jobs that are taken away that 1 job will be created. So there's a gender aspect to this as well. All right. Mariam, last thought.
So in country, go back to your organizations or government and share the good and bad and ugly experiences that you had with us on how we can advance. One last statistics that I share the GIZ statistics with you guys. There was a GIZ survey that was taken in Afghanistan in 7 provinces. 81% of the public absolutely believes whatever they read on social media. So imagine how dangerous that can be. Thank you.
We're going to remain competitive with the rest of the world, I'm talking about Africa, the way we lead and guide our people is very important. The kind of policies we put in place to especially guide our young people. I think in my generation, we're going to be competing with machines, and these machines are, pretty smarter. They're doing, all the jobs, and there's a chance that, if we don't, look at the way we educate the next generation, we're going to find ourselves in a situation where, a lot more, people finish school and will not have any job, because technology is actually, taking over all the jobs. So, in conclusion, I would say that, leadership is very important at all levels, at the governmental level, corporation.
To end on, and thank you so much to all the panelists, excellent interventions. Thank you to the audience for being here and for listening. And my sort of two takeaways are that there seems to be a vertical, maybe we can call it even a value chain of access, where it goes, that we're still talking about physical issues. We're talking about infrastructure, basic issues. We're talking about legal, regulatory, that a country is open to implementing digital technologies. At the same time, we're talking about discovering new pathways. We're talking about leapfrogging. We're talking about combining various technologies to enhance the potential and to become integrated into an increasingly digital economy and an automated world. And there are various questions that obviously arise from those. And the second thing is that we talk about access like it's a good thing, and it is. But there are also negative aspects of access, and I think Miriam has kind of clearly brought that forward into the conversation, and that is something that I think, and hopefully all these interventions open the door.
Thank you, Ritika. We will now give you access to the outside world.